Welcome inside the latest edition of SVG Rewind, our video interview series where we take a look back at some of the coolest, most technological, more interesting live productions that we've seen across the industry today. Really excited to break down this one. We're taking a look back at the latest edition of the PWHL Takeover Tour. Last Sunday, Minnesota and Montreal, two PWHL teams, played in Denver, where a crowd of 14,018 fans turned out to set the record for the largest crowd in the United States to ever watch a professional women's hockey game. They watched the Frost beat Montreal at Ball Arena in Denver, and we have the front bench that produced that game. It also made for great television in addition to being a really cool on-site activation. We're joined by Amanda Smerage, who's the director of that game, and Katie Halter, who's the producer on it. To both of you, congratulations on that production, and thanks so much for taking the time to reflect on it today.
Thank you. Glad
Thank you.
So obviously the crowd number is awesome, seeing the images. I mean, we've seen from even the first season of the PWHL some big crowds. Katie, in your hometown, your hometown area, the Minnesota Frost have drawn some really cool crowds, the XL Energy Center, when they were PWHL Minnesota. Now we got the Frost, which is cool. So Katie, I'll start with you. What was the energy like? Obviously in the arena was very cool, but when you're behind the scenes on a production like this, what was it like in the truck, and what was the kind of the energy on the crew when you had such a great turnout for this at a neutral site?
Yeah, I mean, there was excitement from the get-go. The moment we walked in the truck and introduced our crew to the rules of the PWHL. I mean, Colorado is home to a lot of hockey teams and they're used to hockey, but the new rules of the PWHL, including the no escape rule on power plays, the jailbreak rule with shorthanded goals, they all thought it was great and they were excited to see what the product was on the ice as well. And then when we got the number of 14,000, it just kind of set in that Denver is ready. Denver's ready for a professional women's hockey league. So it was just exciting. And I'm excited. I was excited to be there.
Yeah, hearing the chants of like "we want a team" or whatever it was they were saying was very, very cool.
Yeah.
Amanda, how about for you? When you're sitting there, you're trying to call shots. Is it resonating with you? Do you know just kind of
Yeah,
what's going on in the building?
it absolutely is. Especially, I was lucky enough to have a fantastic group of camera operators who I've known a very long time. Going back to two of the people on the crew back in 2014 were on the women's hockey in Sochi with me. So some of us have been doing women's hockey for a very long time.
Mhm.
Um, and we had, done a lot of the US Canada friendlies leading up to that, and just the atmosphere that this league has started to bring and sort of introduce people to on a bigger stage is really cool. I had told, the operators that we were looking at a big number. And I think the first thing that they said when they got on camera for warm-ups is it is loud in here. And every time like they keyed in, you could just hear the energy, like the energy in the building was electric. You could really feel how much the crowd was buzzing and how much they were enjoying it.
Mhm.
And even to the point that, my camera operators in the building were just saying that this is an incredible, incredible atmosphere, very different from an Avalanche game. Very loud, very fun. They were all saying, hey, we're not Swifties, but what song is this? Like it was kind of a funny thing because there's been across the league you've seen probably like social media clips of fans finishing out songs when they play songs during, horns and whistles, things like that.
Mhm.
And I think, it was really cool to see our operators really lean in and feel that energy too.
Nice. I'd like to get your perspective from each of your respective positions, and maybe Amanda, I'll come right back to you as director. When you're in a unique environment like this, and this is one of 9 games that the PWHL will play in neutral cities across the U.S. and Canada, how does it affect or change your decision making in any way? Obviously, the game is gospel, but when you're cutting shots, are you approaching it differently than maybe you would for just a Boston regular season game in Boston?
I think for me, coming in with bigger resets, showing the
Mhm.
amount of people there, showing the atmosphere in the arena is crucial with this. I've been lucky enough. I did one of the first takeover series last year in Pittsburgh, and we had an incredible crowd in Pittsburgh last year. It was I direct a lot of the New York Sirens games,
Okay.
and I've directed the Boston Fleet. So last year, Boston, New York, we didn't draw quite as well as Minnesota did last year.
Mhm.
So when I got to Pittsburgh last year, that was the first atmosphere game that really brought in we have something going here. There is interest in this. And it's not that New York and Boston don't have great fan bases. We have fantastic fan bases. But in Boston, they're at Saga Center, which is a much smaller venue. And in New York, there's a lot of things to do in New York. Last year, we bounced between 3 different venues. This year, we found a home at Prudential Center. So we're starting, as we're going through the season, we're seeing more and more fans come in. So when we can get a chance to showcase the people that are supporting this league, that's just as important as the game itself. Our fans they're invested. If you ever watch on a YouTube stream, there's a chat going along the whole thing. People are really, really invested in what we're doing. They have opinions about it. So it's really cool to be able to take some of those little nuggets that we get on our calls, like, hey, the fans have said this, and really bring that into the production side of it and show them that, yes, we're listening, we're here, and we want to make this product just as much about our fans as we do the talent on the ice, which is so spectacular.
Sure. And Katie, as a producer, obviously these trips, these takeover tours are almost like ambassadorial trips. They're more than just the game. There's practices, there's signings, there's a lot of interactions with the community. So is that affecting segments you want to interject? I mean, how as a producer are you preparing for this differently as opposed to maybe a regular traditional Minnesota home playoff game when they're playing at XL?
Yeah, so in Colorado it was a little different because we did have a Frost player that was from Colorado. So
Oh,
we
cool.
made sure to tell her story. Nicole Hensley is a goalie.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, she's coming off of injury, so she wasn't playing. But it was really cool for her, and she had made it a point early in the season that she was okay with talking about whatever we wanted her to talk about, promoting Colorado's youth programs, any of that. And so that was a big focal point for our reporter. And then also our head coach, Ken Klee, played for the Avalanche for 1 year and then has since called Denver home. So normally we do a coach interview under 10 in the first and second periods. And so I just directed our reporter to ask Klee about just the atmosphere because he's from Denver. He's seen women's hockey grow and he's been a part of the women's hockey game for a long time. And just what that atmosphere was like for him to be home in his home state and seeing all the fans out there supporting them. But other than that, I think just showing the fans as much as possible and getting the atmosphere across on the broadcast was our main goal for all of the Takeover Tour games.
I think one of the best things about it was you got a great game. I mean, it was tied 2-2 deep into the third period. Minnesota ended up with the victory over Montreal. So when you look back purely as a game tape, as a producer and a director, Amanda, starting with you, what were some of the highlights that maybe emerge when you say, like, this as a television product, we are really happy with this replay or this segment or the angle that we caught on this goal? What were some of the highlights for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing was we had a great story coming into here. Montreal's been on all 3 takeover stops so far, and they'll continue on there on the next takeover in Quebec City as well. They are, I think, the home team for the first time. I don't think they were home at either of the other 2. So they've been really drawing well, and they're like in Montreal, and now like we're getting to showcase some of the best hockey in the world. We've been calling her, Captain Hockey. Like Marie-Philippe Poulin is just incredible. And so like we got to showcase, hey, if you haven't been watching this, here's what you missed in Seattle and in Vancouver. And now she's coming into Denver and we're going to get this great matchup. So, sometimes with, startup leagues, we don't have quite the budget of a Winter Classic, right? Like this isn't, we're not able to do what TNT or ESPN or anything like that is doing at this point. So I think the fact that we're able to show how big these games are getting with sort of a regular scale production. I have 5-man cameras. I was lucky enough to be able to take an RF from the house. The house put out 2 other cameras that I was able to utilize more for tape than live. This isn't a dual, we're a world feed here. So they weren't getting dual tallies. I wasn't able to talk to them. But, I spoke with the house director and was able to, be like, hey, are you putting an RF out on the ice or do I need to move my handheld out there? Can I utilize them for other fan shots during this time to make this look bigger if your RF is going to be there? So, we always, when you do these bigger games, we're covering the anthems, we're covering the intros, we're covering things like that. So it gives it this sense of a a sense of importance, really. And being able to introduce people to that, really like the pageantry of it, the interaction of our players with their fans is really something that, we see it in hockey warmups at the NHL level all the time, right? Give us a puck, all these things. We're seeing, players trade friendship bracelets. We're seeing them give sticks. We're seeing them go over to the bench and talk to these girls that are playing hockey and coming up and doing this. I think Minnesota put out a great feature with their social media team with Kendall Coyne Schofield mic'd up talking to a bunch of the girls, and like getting these moments and being able to show them to people outside of the arena, putting the fans at home into the house and being like, this is what you're privy to when you come to one of these games is, I think, the biggest thing for me. And I would love to see our broadcast grow to be able to really welcome my cat, to really, really, get people to be able to see how fun these games are, how different they are than a regular NHL game, but how the level of competition is right there with it. People are amazed at how fast it is, how they're hitting. Like we are checking, we're seeing open ice hits, we're seeing, checks up against the boards. I don't think we've gotten an all-out fight in the league yet, but I don't think we're far off, Katie. I mean, like it gets hippie out there. And I think that's a really cool part of it.
It's very cool. Katie, how about for you from a producer's perspective, when you reflect on the game now that it's done, what were some of the things that stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, first off, with the ceremonial puck drop, we had Nicole Hensley, a goalie, out there for a ceremonial puck drop. You don't see a goalie take a puck drop very often.
True.
So that's just off the top was something that was really cool and different for a takeover tour game. But just showing the pageantry that each city has started off the games with the ceremonial puck drop, the lineups, how the crowd embraces all of the women on the ice. They've all made sure to cover the lineups and the ceremonial puck drops and the anthems just to get the atmosphere off the bat. Other than that, when the announcement of the attendance came down, it came down mid-second period that it was a record. So then we worked with the game operations staff to line up our announcement of it on the broadcast as well as the announcement in arena. So we could just see everyone react to us setting a record. And it was that by far was my favorite moment.
I have goosebumps right now thinking, I'm not kidding. Like, I actually have goosebumps thinking about it.
And I had a hard time, like I cry a lot. So I had a hard time keeping it together when that all happened, just because that moment it's so cool. We were part of a record. Yeah, we were part of a record-breaking event.
Well, welcome back to Ball Arena, where Minnesota just took the lead 3-2 off a goal from Maggie Flaherty, her first goal of the season. And I'm not sure if you can hear the chants and the cheers behind me, but that's because they are announcing inside the building that the attendance today, 14,018 people in attendance for this PWHL Takeover Tour game. That is a new record in the U.S. It's the highest ever for a professional women's hockey game in the United States. Truly incredible. Thank you so much to everyone who came to Denver today for this game. It's just one small step in the right direction for women's hockey.
Thanks to everybody in the Mile High City. Thanks to Ball Arena. Thanks to the folks at the Avalanche, everyone involved in making this happen. And everyone at the PWHL has done a great job promoting the Takeover Tour, all the stops, and we have many more along the way.
And the crowd here in Ball Arena, Clay chanting, "We want a team." And they showed up today showing the league just how badly they would love to have a team in here regularly to come watch. And
I'm right there with you, Katie. I probably would have gotten a little emotional too. I can be a bit of a crier.
We talk about like our technological advancements and things like this, and I'm sure we'll get into this later. But the biggest thing for me that I was so not devastated about, but it really like I was so proud of what we were able to do. But Clay and Alexis were in Minnesota because of some travel issues, and they did such a good job of keeping their energy at the pace and level of the crowd and the excitement of the game. I wish they had been there to feel the energy in the bowl, and like for them to have welcomed us back off this PA announcement. They did such a good job of selling what we were doing. But the truth of it is, we had to pivot at the last moment with some technical things that I'm sure we'll get into at some point. And they did such a good job of, I don't think to the casual viewer at home, there was a disconnect there. I just wish that they could have been there to experience it as well, because it was such a special moment and they got to call such a cool game with that. It's amazing the things that we can do. And I was so proud that we were able to capture all of those moments with some hurdles that we had to deal with.
Yeah, that's obviously a huge piece of this that I wanted to ask you about, Katie. As Amanda alluded to there, you're a play-by-play and analyst due to weather-based travel issues?
Just general flight issues.
Just general infrastructure flight problems in the United States. We're not in the building and called the game off of monitors at the FanDuel Sports Network studios in downtown Minneapolis. So walk us through what needed to be done. Like how quickly did you have to turn that around? When did that become a oh shit moment, or was it one? And how'd you guys make it work?
Yeah, so I got to Denver earlier on Saturday, and by the time I was going to bed, Alexis and Clay were on the plane. They were on the tarmac. I was like, great, I'll wake up later and make sure they make it. So I woke up at 2 a.m. and I had about 60 messages, and the first one was, we're going back to the airport. I was like, okay. Well, thankfully, Rob Reichley from Raycom and Jeremy Langer from the PWHL, I had alerted them that they were having issues earlier in the day, that they had been delayed, and we might need to start thinking of a plan B. And thankfully, throughout the night, both of them and Jason Clemens, my normal director back here in Minnesota and also works at FanDuel, had started forming a plan B, and we were ready to go. For the most part, in theory, we were ready to go by the time I woke up at 2 a.m. So
yeah, I mean, I had gotten to Denver at about 8:30 at night, and by the time the airport in Denver to the hotel got checked in, my phone was on Do Not Disturb, and I went to go grab it after getting settled into the hotel to about 25 messages, a couple of missed phone calls from Jason, and a couple urgent messages from Jeremy. Amanda, what's your opinion on this? I looked at it and I said, well, this is not ideal, right? But we are honestly, we were in the best possible scenario to make this work. Being in Denver, we were utilizing the Avalanche regular home truck, which is a mobile TV group truck. FanDuel in Minnesota is thankfully part of the mobile TV group cloud tree. So we had connectivity that we could dial in. Basically, as soon as we got the okay, Jason started working on transmission paths, making sure that we had some backup paths available. I think there was a basketball game in Minnesota that night. Is that right? There was a Timberwolves game?
There was hockey.
There was hockey.
In Vegas.
So there was hockey on the Saturday and then basketball on Sunday night. Is that what was going on?
Yes.
So Jason was luckily at the studio already and started working on that, started digging through for our COVID protocol, talkback boxes and headsets and all the things. I mean, it sounds so strange now, but this was one of those, oh my gosh, this is a COVID protocol that we can put in place. And thank God we have it. If we were in a different situation with a different truck and a different broadcast booth, I don't think this would have come together in the same way. We got very, very lucky in our locations, and that Clay and Alexis were both able to go into the office and do this. And it looked fantastic. Jason did some magic and made some beautiful graphics. Sorry, for our beautiful graphics for our set there. And as much as I know it was a struggle for Clay and Alexis to manage off the monitors and know that there is a delay in your calling these, and you do need to match your energy to what's going on in the arena. And they're sitting in a quiet studio with just Jason there. It's the three of them in that studio, and everyone else is on site in Denver and taking in the atmosphere and making sure that we can do this. we really fell into the most perfect scenario to make this work.
Sure. Yeah. And Katie, to your point, I hesitate to say that it's commonplace these days on RSNs, but it's at the very least, I'd say, battle tested, this types of how in most circumstances at the RSNs, the broadcasts for road games have, evolved and changed quite a bit. And you do a lot of other work on other sports properties at FanDuel Sports Network, the RSN, in the Twin Cities. So I guess that had to at least give you some level of comfort knowing that you weren't going completely out on the end of a branch here to do this.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it's all a situation where we're all familiar with it and with what we've dealt with in the last 5 years. And then especially at the RSNs, we've been dealing with it more and more with just how things have evolved. So it wasn't that big of a struggle. It was just more of just making sure Clay and Alexis had the information that they needed to call it correctly. So like if there was a delayed penalty, I made sure the TOC told me so I could tell them. If the goalie got pulled, I told them immediately. The crowd chant of "We want a team," I told Alexis because she couldn't hear it.
Sure,
so
yeah.
she was able to relay that to the broadcast. So it was just a matter of figuring out the paths of who's telling who what and when, and then what else we could do to support them to get the right information across.
Well, I'm sure it was at least a bummer for them, but
Yes.
They did an admirable job considering the circumstances.
Well, and we got it put together within 12 hours. I mean, I went to bed about 1:00 in the morning. I know, Katie, you said you woke up at 2, but our game was a 1:00 puck drop in the afternoon. It wasn't a night game.
Sure.
So by the time I jumped off this text thread where I said, "Hey, everybody get some sleep. Clay, Alexis, go home, be in the studio for, noon your time," or I think it was noon there, when they came in. And Jeremy had signed off and we had a, hey, okay, everybody feels good about this. Amanda, Jason, you know how to technically make this function. We had great engineers that we let know early. We had about a 12-hour turnaround to get everything settled. So this was not like, hey, put this in the paperwork and then we have a 7 p.m. puck drop. It was a 12-hour turnaround, and it was all hands on deck for that. As soon as we got in, I think we got to the truck about 6:30, 6:45 in the morning, and it was, it was okay. Let's put this together. The engineers know they've got a secondary path so we can send a quad and not just a program monitor. So we were able to put out like a wide ice shot so that, Clay and Alexis could see things happening. Even if they couldn't necessarily make out who it was, they could see that if there was something behind the play that wasn't on the game camera because something was lagging, things like that. Or if it was a whistle and we were cutting around, Clay had asked, hey, be kind of judicious. I need to see, the game camera most of the time. So we gave him a feed of the game camera in that quad. We gave him a feed of our font in that quad so we could see what was coming. So it was, just making sure that we had the resources and all hands on deck for 12 hours before we had a puck drop.
Oh, boy. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
One other thing is, so we do have reporters on these shows, but they're all local. So we did have a reporter on site. She does, her name is Rachel Toss, and she does Avalanche games, but she's not a normal PWHL reporter. So she really didn't know what she was getting thrown into. So I texted her right away on a thread with Clay and Alexis, and they normally meet with the coaches 90 minutes before the game, both coaches. So I told Rachel, I was like, you're going to just have to call them and just have them join you in this meeting on a call, because that's the only way they're going to get this information. There's no other way for them to meet with the coaches, which it was just more of a lift for her. But I mean, thankfully she was there, because otherwise it would have been more on our plates to try and get them time with the coaches. And she did carry a lot of the weight of like conveying the atmosphere and stuff like that and helping us tell that story.
That's awesome. Well, never a dull moment, but kudos to all of you involved in pulling it off because it still looked great at the end of the day. I'd like to just kind of zoom out broadly because obviously the PWHL is still a relatively new entity. It's in its second year. This is obviously an exciting year with the introduction of the team brands and the team names and logos, really cool looking jerseys and everything like that. So that's a big part of the fun story. But from a production perspective, Amanda, as you said earlier, this is a single world feed broadcast production that's done, and that's the case for every PWHL game, not these takeover tour games. So games that are in the United States, Raycom Sports is the production support behind that. In Canada, it's Dome Productions. And then there's different in-market RSN distribution deals. For example, like in Boston, they're on NESN. In New York, it's on MSG. In Minnesota, you're on your FanDuel Sports Network. Of course, fans everywhere can watch on YouTube, various networks across Canada. So the PWHL Takeover Tour Series games, and Katie, maybe I'll start with you on this one. How would you say they compare crew size, production resources? Obviously, the venues of the specific teams might play a factor here. Minnesota, your team, plays in an NHL-sized arena, so maybe it's a different story. But in what way is the league and the production partners stepping up, quote unquote, in any way for these takeover games, as it may be compared to traditional regular games in the home venues?
Yeah, for the takeover tour games, at least from my perspective, there are some additional tools and gadgets that we get to use, but not every venue gets them. So that's just kind of a budget thing. It's just we're still a small league and the money is just what it is. But other than that, from a producer standpoint, there's not much of a difference between the takeover tour games and a regular game. Thankfully, I think Quebec City is the first stop on the takeover tour that's not an NHL arena.
Oh yeah.
So that'll
Sure.
be an additional challenge for them. But every stop so far has been an NHL arena, and I think that really eases the load for us because we know that they're capable of doing what they are on a normal basis. So from my standpoint, there wasn't much of a difference on that.
Okay, very cool. One of the other kind of little bits of history that occurred during this is this is the first time for a PWHL game that the producer director tandem were both women, which is very exciting. So what was that? What layer did that add? Did that also lead to a crying moment, Katie? What were they? What were some of the when you layer in? Obviously, there's a million other things going on. But what does that mean to you? Katie, to have been a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, Amanda's the first female director I've ever worked with. So this was just a couple check marks off the list here. But the first cool moment was when Rachel, our reporter, came into the truck and she's like, "Which one is Katie?" Like, normally you don't have to ask that question because we're usually the only females in the truck. So that was cool.
Nice.
Other than that, I mean, it's just we try to tell the stories of breaking barriers on the ice, and that's the main focus of the league. But this game, we broke barriers behind the scenes too, and that's just as important. I've never had anything like it, so it was cool. I'm glad it's done, and I hope that we get to do it many, many more times.
Yeah, nice.
And I mean, it really is it. And like Katie said, when Rachel did come in and said, "Oh, which one's Katie?" I think I looked at you and I was like, "Wow!" Like that isn't a question you usually get at the front bench level. And I've worked with very few female producers through the years. Last year, I was with the Arizona Coyotes, and there was one game where Stevie Katz, who normally did our pre and post games, she stepped in for a game up in, I think we were in Calgary. Our regular producer had some family things and left a trip, and she stepped in. And I think that was the first time I got to work with a female producer at the game level. She'd done pre-games with me before, and that was cool. But to do it at the game level is really cool. And I've had a lot of great women who've come before me to sort of break these barriers. Lisa Seltzer, who I worked with at NBC, and she was with the Ducks, and she was in Chicago, was one of the first women directing hockey in the United States, and it's fantastic. Right now, Rose Marakian and Dawn Landis of the Bruins and Winnipeg are to directors that I'm lucky enough to call my friends as well. I did a ton of years with Rose in Boston when I was a technician. And to be able to finally sit in this chair and have these experiences myself after, really not seeing a lot of women in these roles, it's a really cool moment to take in. And then to remember that, we're doing this game and we're showing women on the ice now. And that is such a exciting thing to be a part of this women's sports movement as it grows. And we've seen in the WNBA what, the Caitlin Clark effect has had. And it took a long time for that league to really get to this level. And we're in year 2 and we are getting these record-breaking crowds. The takeover in Vancouver that they did prior to Denver, I think we just found out that, I don't know if this was an official or unofficial mandate, but all the female youth hockey groups canceled their practices and their games on that Wednesday of the game so that they could go and watch the PWHL. In Seattle, we had the amazing opportunity to have Jessica Campbell, who's the assistant coach for the Kraken, come on our broadcast. And to see, women breaking barriers in all of these ways, it's something so cool to be a part of, and to see how quickly we're progressing in it is just really exciting.
Yeah, I think it was really cool. I think it was, I saw Maddie Rooney, who's the goaltender, obviously from Minnesota. I'm not telling you anything. I'm telling the audience. Yeah, gold medal Olympian, talking about how when she grew up, she went to NHL games, which is still cool. Great. Go to NHL games. But to see these young women, their first professional game, maybe they're going to, being a women's PWHL game, obviously tugs on your heartstrings a little bit. That's pretty cool moment, I'm sure, for them. And, very similar seat for you. If there are aspiring producers and directors out there watching this interview today, they can now look at you both as inspirations going forward. One last thing before we kind of wrap up, I want to kind of talk about each of your perspectives, not just on the Takeover Tour, but on any of the PWHL games you're working this year. Just how different is this year? Is from each of your respective, and maybe this applies to you more, Katie, as a producer. But how much more are you leaning into? Obviously, star building is a big part of it, but now you're also introducing brands and logos and team names. The league did a really great job with those. Some really cool team logos and brands and everything. Totally editorializing, but I think Montreal's logo and jersey is like one of the coolest things that's come out in a while. I absolutely love it. But is that a factor where you're like, all right, we need to let people know? Like, I talked to the guys who designed the graphics pack, and they're like, we wanted to get those logos everywhere we could. Just how big of a factor is that, and how different is it from last year when those brand identities didn't exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all very happy not to be calling them PWHL Minnesota or PWHL Montreal anymore.
Just rolls off the tongue.
It was
yeah.
a mouthful.
But yeah, the graphics package and the names and the brands spot on in every city. I think the new graphics package really elevated the products. They wanted to put faces on everything where we could, so the fans had some way to associate the name to a face. And I think we've done a good job conveying all of that. I think just in general, the fan bases have really bought in. I think after year 1, we've seen a significant growth in just attendance in general. And I think the Takeover Tour does help amplify the league to the rest of the country and to Canada as well. I think there's a want and a need in various markets, and we'll just see what happens from there. But from a league perspective, they did add reporters this year for every game. So that's been very nice to just have different eyes and ears down on the ice level to convey some messages from the benches. But other than that, I think the league has done a great job. We're still in year 2. There's still ways to grow and stuff, but I think we're on a very good path to keep growing.
Cool. And Amanda, from your perspective as a director, anything big different?
Yeah, I think the branding of the teams has really given the fans something to create an identity with. I do a lot of the New York Sirens games. That is, even though I'm in Arizona, the New York Sirens are my home market. And there's another thing about this. We're really regionalizing the way that we do these productions. And I'm lucky enough to be able to go to New York and do these games. Last year, I made a big push to be involved with this league. I had talked to Jeremy and Rob, and I was like, if we're promoting a women's league, I was like, we need to have women at all levels doing this. As long as they're, competent. I'm not saying, it's, put women in every job, but if you have people that are, competent in these roles, like, let's make sure that we're not just overlooking, behind the scenes. And the fans in New York they've created these Sirens helmets. If you watch any Sirens game, they have these teal helmets and they put a siren on top, and the building at the Prudential Center has a siren, an air siren that they set off before every game. So I think it's really cool the way that the identities of the teams are emerging in ways that you weren't really sure. In Vancouver, the Boston Fleet came in wearing all fisherman outfits, throwing fish at each other, really embracing, the Seattle part of it. But also, if you think about it, like the Boston Fleet, it's the ocean, it's boats, it's all that. So it's their identity as well. It wasn't just the identity of Seattle and where they were. In Denver, Minnesota came in wearing like ski uniforms, right? Like little 80s like warm-up suits. It was great.
Cool.
And I think, giving the fans those identities to cling on to, you're seeing so much. When you go to a New York game, the crowd is just teal. It is like a sea of teal in there. And I'm sure in Minnesota, it is just purple everywhere, right? And it's cool in the takeover team tours. When you go to these other cities, you're seeing all these jerseys and all these shirts, and the merch is being sold in cities that don't have teams. It's showing that, we are ready to expand. Like, there is a want for it. And I think, the league did such a good job of making that identity something that people can hold on to. Last year it felt, PWHL Boston, PWHL Minnesota, PWHL Montreal. Everyone was excited for it, but it didn't have the same sort of electricity to it that you're seeing now. I think, just the jerseys, the sweaters, the pads that the goalies have made, really seeing the identities of these women come through, and we're seeing it shine. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to watch. A lot of fun to watch, whether it's a takeover tour game or just a regular season game. Been a great season 2 so far, and we wish you both nothing but the best going forward. Congratulations on this particular broadcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to reflect with us today on it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, that is Katie Halter and Amanda Smerage. They were the producer and director, respectively, on that record-setting PWHL Takeover Tour game that took place in Denver last weekend. The PWHL Takeover Tour actually continues this weekend on Sunday in Quebec City. You talk about a city that's been itching for professional hockey to come back. It'll be very interesting to see how the crowd is up there. That is this Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, where Ottawa will play Montreal in that game. Thanks so much for tuning in. We got plenty more episodes of SVG Rewind where you can take back a look at some really cool productions going on across the industry. You can watch those now over at our website at sportsvideo.org and our video player SVG Play. Until next time, I'm Brandon Costa. Take care.